I'm here today to talk a little bit about the grip and how that relates to wrist angles and how some of this HackMotion data can be efficiently used to help your students play better golf as it relates to the grip. So when a student comes to me for a lesson, the very first thing I do, especially if they have some grip issues, is I will do some basic measurements, some TPI stuff. I'll measure range of motion with their wrists, and I'll also take a look at the size of their hands and grip strength, because all of those things have a lot to do with whether they can move the club and get the club going into flexion. For me, the number one thing when it's all said and done is the best players and the best ball strikers, the club is either staying neutral coming down or the wrist is moving into some amount of flexion. It's decreasing the amount of extension in the wrist in transition. Very, very few players add extension coming down and have this look where the wrist is cupped and the face is opening. That's really what poor players do, what we see a lot of slicers doing. The best players maintain this wrist angle or add a little bit of flexion to it. So in every lesson that I give when I'm trying to improve someone's contact or ball striking, it's all in an effort to get this wrist angle working a little bit more properly in transition. The best players are always going into some amount of flexion, whether it's taking a lot of some extension out of it or maintaining where it is. So that is very, very related to the grip. Obviously, it's our only point of contact with the club is the grip. So if the grip is not functioning in a way that's going to allow golfers to do that, it's going to be difficult. So the first assessment I'll do is I'll basically check range of motion in their wrist. So I'll use a 6-iron, again, just basic TPI stuff, and I'm basically making sure that they have some range of motion going this way with their wrists and this way. I'll have it matched up with a 6-iron, which is about a 60-degree angle, and make sure that they can move their wrist decently in that manner. The other thing that I'll do is I'll have them hold their wrists out like this and check radial and ulnar deviation, make sure they've got some movement going this way, and I also check how much they're able to move their forearms, how much they're able to pronate and supinate. The other thing that I'll do, pretty basic, is I'll get something here that measures how much grip strength they have, and I'll check this. Being able to get this club working better coming down, which is sort of moment of truth and impact, being able to get this club into a good delivery position, you've got to have some strength. And if you don't have strength, obviously, which not all golfers do, then they will have to work a little bit harder. But there are certain grips that will work better for them, and I'm going to get into that here in a second. The last thing I'll do is I'll measure the size of their hands. Obviously, golfers that have big hands, they tend to get the club a little bit more in the fingers and have a little bit of a stronger grip because they can get more of their hand around the club. Golfers that have small hands, they tend to have not much room in here, so they have very palmy grips, which limits the range of motion that they've got in terms of moving and creating angles with their wrists. So if someone has, what I would call limited range of motion in their wrists and their grip strength on the meter is not very high, personally for me, I think it's very important for that person to have a strong grip, because they are going to have, or a stronger grip, they're going to have a hard time twisting the club, moving the club, getting the club to go into flexion here if they don't have much range of motion. So if they have the club in a little bit too much of a weak position here in their grip, it's going to be really hard for them to get the club back to square. So golfers, for me, that have limited range of motion in their wrist, I like to get them going a little bit more down in the fingers, right? But I keep it simple for students. Strong grip, weak grip, neutral grip, right? Strong grip is too much in the fingers, too many knuckles showing. Weak grip is too high in the palm, no knuckles showing, and you can't see the logo on the glove. And you'll see here that I've got a magic marker here on my glove for neutral, sort of in the lifeline from the base of the pinky to the middle of the index finger, with this fleshy part of my heel pad here on top of the club. So neutral grip sort of looks like this. But coming back to my measurements here in the beginning, again, I'm just checking some basic things. I don't want to ask the golfer to do something with the grip or with wrist angles that they physically can't do. So putting them through a little bit of a screening, I think, is important. So this is a young, talented junior golfer that I teach, Jessica. And in this swing on the bottom was when she first showed up. This is a 9-iron swing, and she was struggling with short ball flights and pulls to the left. And you can see here she has a
bit of a palm grip, and the handle is pretty far behind the ball. A little bit of extension there in her wrist, and ball position quite forward for a 9-iron. So the numbers associated with that swing are here. She was 30 degrees of extension at address and 28 at the top, which was not bad, but you can see there at impact 22 and a little bit too extended there, and she was really sort of getting that position where the handle was behind the head a little bit, the club head a little bit too much into impact, and with the extension the club face was closing, and she would sort of have these neutral swing paths but 3 or 4 degrees closed with the club face, and like I said, everything was sort of missing with a pull. So we made some adjustments there on the top. We got the grip a little bit stronger and more in the fingers. We pushed the ball position back just a touch. We added just a little bit of handle forward so that is a little bit more in line with the ball for a short iron. And you can see how the club appears to have a little bit less loft on it at address too there. And after a little bit of work, those numbers got quite a bit better. You can see we took a little bit of the extension out at address to make it a little bit easier for her. And the numbers a little bit more what we were looking for there at the top, and especially at impact at +8. That felt a lot better to her, a lot more solid. The ball started on a much straighter line there and had much less of that left miss. So we actually got her hitting it less to the left by strengthening the grip, getting it a little bit more in the fingers so that she had a little bit more control of the club, pushing the ball position back a little bit, and getting the handle slightly forward. So every case is different, but when I saw that look of the setup on the bottom and I saw the excessive extension there at address and the ball forward and the miss to the left, I sort of coupled all those things together, pushed the ball back a bit, got the grip a little bit more in the fingers, got the handle a little bit more forward. She had much more of a compression feel and the ball started to fly a little bit more.
A question that I often get is, when do I work on a player's grip? And that really depends on what the club face is doing. When someone shows up to me for a lesson, the first thing I'm trying to do is get the club face better, because that's going to have the biggest influence on ball flight and consistency, contact. The golf ball is going to start 85-90% of the time. It's going to start on the line the club face is on. So if I can get someone's club face better first and foremost, for me that's a low-hanging fruit, and that's how I have quick results in getting a player on the right track to hitting better shots and feeling a little bit better about it. Once I've diagnosed them with having an issue with their club face, the very first thing that I'm going to look at is their grip. And is their hands on the club in a way that's allowing it to function properly and to get the face in a good position. So I'm trying to basically keep it simple. So I'm saying golfers either have too much hook spin or too much slice spin. If I'm teaching a golfer that has too much slice spin, I'm making sure that their grip is not too weak and too high in the palm. Having the grip too high in the palm where they can't see the logo on their glove or can't see any knuckles is going to lead to a little bit more of a slice swing. And having the club, contrary to that, too much in the fingers and too strong of a grip where I can see, 2.5 or more knuckles here, 3 knuckles, that's going to create more of a closed club face, and it's going to really allow golfers to struggle with hook spin. So when I'm teaching one or two of those, either of those golfers, a slicer or the hooker, if they have a grip that's too far outside the realm of what I would call neutral, looking like this, then I'm absolutely going to work on their grip first and foremost. It's not always the easiest thing to work on because it's uncomfortable, but as soon as they see the ball flying a little bit straighter and with less curve on it, if they're used to slicing it, if they see that with less slice, they're going to be happy at the end of the day. So I'm basically trying to get everyone into a fairly neutral position. If I'm teaching a slicer, I'm trying to get them towards strong. If I'm teaching a hooker, I'm trying to get them a little bit more towards weak. I'm trying to get everyone to sort of be in the middle here at neutral. Always better off with a little bit more of a grip on the strong side than the weak side. The problem with a palmy grip and a grip that is a little bit sort of high in the hand and doesn't have much extension at address is it limits the range of motion in your wrist and does not allow you to get the club working into flexion, doesn't allow you to allow this lead wrist to get into flexion, because when the club is sitting too high in the palm, you can't really move your wrist very much. When the club is sitting more in the lifeline and sitting in the fingers, you have much more range of motion to create some angle and some hinge and to really get the club working into flexion here in the transition. So I am not a big fan of having the club sitting a little bit, sitting too high in the palm and sitting in a weak position. The best way to recognize that, though, especially for the golfer, if they have too much of a palmy or a sort of fingery grip, so to speak, is to just look where it is in relation to, again, the lifeline here. If the club is sitting high, we'd say it's too much in the palm, and if the club is sitting too low here, we'd say it's too much in the fingers, and that is really going to make this move difficult. Another question that I get often is, how does extension change depending on the grip? So the stronger the grip is, and the more the club is sitting in the fingers, the more it's going to create a little bit of extension, especially at address, and then carried into the swing. The more the club is sitting in the palm here, the more it's going to create a little bit of flexion here this way. And like we talked about, a little less range of motion. So for slicer, the best thing to do is to get the club sitting a little bit more in the fingers, so they have a little bit more range of motion with their wrist, seeing 2.5 knuckles, and then working the club into a little bit of flexion. Because if the grip is on there in a good strong way, and you can get the left wrist, the lead wrist here, working into a little bit more flexion, the club face is going to be in a much, much stronger position. Slice is the number one thing we're trying to fix in this game. If you can fix a golfer slice, they're going to be coming back for more, and they're going to be bringing their friends with them. So the number one thing I'm trying to help slicers get the club face into a little bit of a stronger position. Right, so there's two reasons why people slice the ball. They have an open club face and an out to in swing path, and the face is open in relation to the path. But the first thing, the order with which I'm trying to fix those things in, is I'm trying to get the club face better first. I'm trying to get the grip on there a little bit stronger, and I'm trying to work the club back in a little bit more of what feels maybe like a sort of, say, a toe down position here, a left wrist a little bit more into flexion here. Because if I can get the club face better first, they're not going to slice nearly as much. Even if the ball has a little bit of fade spin on it, it will be significantly less if the club face is stronger. Once I can get the face into a stronger position for them, then we talk a little bit more about swing path and getting the club to go a little bit more what feels in to out for golfers. As they start seeing their slice turn into a little bit more of a pull, they're going to naturally feel like they got to swing the club a little bit more in to out to get the path better. But the number one thing to fix the slice is to get them hitting it left first. It's very difficult to go from slice to good, but if you can go from slice to pull, it's a little bit easier then to get them hitting the ball a little bit better. So first and foremost for the slicer, I'm getting the club a little bit lower in the fingers here. I'm making sure I can see a little bit of the logo on the glove and 2 or 3 knuckles. I'm feeling a little bit more of a toe down takeaway position, so the club face is stronger. I'm trying to maintain that lead wrist being flexed at the top, and then almost feeling like I'm twisting it a little bit more. I'll say that I'm trying to get the club face looking at the ball a little bit sooner in transition here, so that the face is less open to the path, more square to the path when I hit the ball, and that's going to take significantly more cut spin off the shot. So just to touch on the characteristics of the 3 kinds of grips we've talked about, I'm trying to avoid the weak grip at all costs. When the club's sitting too high in the palm, there's just less range of motion with the wrist, and it's much harder to work the club into flexion and get the face back to square at impact. If I'm working with someone who's hooking the ball, I'm definitely going to get them towards weak, but I wouldn't say I'm trying to give them a weak grip. I'm basically trying to get them from too strong of a grip back towards neutral, which may feel weak to them. With the neutral grip, that's the one that I prefer the most, where the club is just sitting in the lifeline here. That's where I find the numbers to be the easiest to get sort of consistent, but I'm always erring on the side of strong. I'm trying for neutral to strong. When the club's sitting more in the fingers, it's a little bit easier to then work it into flexion and then either maintain or increase the flexion coming down. I just find that you've got the best range of motion with your wrist when you're neutral to strong, and you're really able to work the club into a stronger position. One thing I'll say is being aware of the difference in the extension numbers at address can be important. I have found a lot of students trying to be pretty similar from driver to mid iron to short iron. The more the ball's forward in the stance and the lower the handle is, the more extension there's going to be. So when I've got a driver in my hand and the ball's forward and my handle's a little bit lower because the driver's going to sit a little bit more on a 45-degree angle, there is definitely a higher number with the same grip with the extension number. When I then go and take a 6-iron and I've got the club a little bit more towards the middle of my stance and the club is sitting on a 60-degree angle as opposed to a 45-degree angle, it definitely takes a little bit of the extension out. And if I add a wedge into the equation, I move the ball even more toward middle, Am I even more toward middle, and the handle is the highest, it takes even more of that out, which I like. With the wedge, I'm trying to be a little bit more stiff with my wrist, a little bit more, take the hands out of it, a little bit more dead arm, so to speak. But you can see the difference in the extension when I've got the handle down compared to when the ball's in the middle and I've got the handle up. There's significantly less of that going on. I'd say good players, I'm seeing sort of somewhere in the mid 30s with extension with a driver. I'm seeing something in the high 20s with the extension with a mid club like a 6-iron, and then I'm seeing something much closer to 10 or 15 at address when they've got sand wedge in their hand. So don't be concerned if you find the same grip is causing, with different clubs, is causing a little bit of a different extension number. That's normal, and it's actually something that I look for. One other thing that I would touch on is grip size is really important. I mentioned in the beginning measuring a student's hands. So obviously the thicker the grip, the higher the club's going to sit in the palm, and the smaller the grip, the more the club's going to sit in the fingers, and with a thin, smaller grip, you're really able to get your hands wrapped around it. But it's something that I do for students that are struggling with certain numbers with respect to HackMotion. So if I have a student that has a lot of wrists going on and the club's too much in the fingers, and there's too much rotation going on, and the club is very closed throughout the swing, I'm teaching a hooker, I will definitely give them a thicker grip. It will sit a little bit high in the palm with them not having to change their grip necessarily, and they're able to get the numbers a little bit better. And vice versa. If I'm teaching a slicer and I want to get their hands on the club more securely, more in the fingers and in a stronger position, I will definitely give them a thinner grip. I have found one way to fix slicers is definitely getting smaller grips on their club so that they can get more of their hand wrapped around it, and they're able to really sort of, using the word manipulate again, really trying to get that club into flexion is much easier. So a hooker of the ball, thicker grip's better. A slicer of the ball, thinner grip is definitely better. One other point, some people have raised the question about shaft lean. So you've got to be careful with shaft lean. I try to use a training aid like this to show the differences in the face depending on what I'm doing with the club in terms of shaft lean. So when I'm setting down and addressing, everything's neutral. Obviously the arrow is pointing at the target. But when things get into a little bit too much extension and the handle's behind the ball, obviously I'm going to show, like I showed with Jessica earlier today, the more the ball was forward and the handle was back, the club was pointing more to, the face was pointing more to the left. So having some amount of forward, not a lot, obviously, because the more you go forward, it's going to start to de-loft the club and it's going to start to push the face and the path too much to the right. So very, very careful with shaft lean. But sometimes if I'm teaching a player with too much extension here, I can take a little bit of that out of it with minimal shaft lean, especially if they're struggling with a strong grip and missing left. I can sort of show them how taking some extension out and getting the handle a little bit more forward can get the face pointing a little bit more toward the target. But I find this to be very helpful when I'm adjusting students' grips and showing them where the face is pointing as I adjust the grip and adjust the amount of shaft lean at address.
This is a test that we do sometimes with low handicap golfers, and this is a single-digit handicap here, hitting 3 different shots. The first one is with a weak grip, and the second one is with a neutral grip, and the third one is with a strong grip. And you can see the differences here are interesting, but about what we'd expect. So it's set up there. There's obviously much less extension at address with the club in a little bit of a weaker position. And in the number 3 swing there, in the stronger grip, there is much more extension when the club's down in the fingers and stronger. There is more extension there. And the middle one there is kind of neutral. So you can see those numbers changing at address and at the top and at impact. And it is quite consistent with what you'd expect. So personally, I would always be gearing towards the neutral grip there. I just like how those numbers are a little bit more in line. There's not a lot of changing and manipulating going on there. Those are all getting back to pretty good impact numbers, but you can see the differences and how they change. At the top of the swing, the club that has a little bit less extension at address there, number 1 in the weak grip, obviously is a much flatter wrist position at the top because of the weak grip, so it's only at 7. And then the neutral grip is in the middle there at 24, and then you can see how the third one is the highest number there at 39. The radial and ulnar deviation numbers not really changing much from grip to grip. Obviously, there are some outliers. Typically, we will see a little bit less radial at the top of the swing and the weak grip, just because there's a little bit less range and motion in the swing. In this particular one, they were pretty consistent with each other. You can see how the setup there hasn't changed much, but interesting to take a look at the flexion and extension numbers and how they change and get adjusted from weak to neutral to strong.